That's our sister.
My name is Dr. Alfonso Evans Sr., and I'm excited to talk about taking the risk, meet your father. We are excited to bring you panel discussions. We have some awesome panelists that we are extremely excited about, and we want you to stay tuned. And remember to look for the upcoming book, Taking the Risk, Meet Your Father. Good evening, everyone. We are excited to be back with you as we talk about taking the risk, meet your father. I'm Dr. Alfonso Evans Sr., and I'm telling you tonight is going to be absolutely phenomenal. Remember, get your notebook, get your pen, because you're going to need it. We are so excited to have these panelists this evening as we talk about incarceration and father and son relationships. And we also are inclusive of incarcerated fathers as it relates to daughters. We need to say that on this evening. We're going to start off this evening by asking you to please accept our gratitude for allowing us to come into your homes and your businesses, wherever you are. This is our Father's Day edition this particular evening, and we are truly excited to have you join us. This evening, we're going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves because they're so extraordinary that they need to introduce themselves. So we're going to start off this evening with Dr. Jones.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Evans, for allowing me to be a part of this tonight. I'm Damon Jones. I'm the senior pastor of the Bible Way Baptist Church in West Philadelphia. Been there for 28 years now. And I'm also on the advisory board for the Philadelphia prison system. It's now called the Philadelphia Department of Prisons, but I was appointed to that position by our previous mayor, Michael Nutter, and then reappointed by our current mayor, Jim Kinney. And I'm also the founder of an organization that goes into the prisons to work with young men who are what we call direct file, which simply means that they're being charged as adults. So dealing with some young men that are between the ages of 15 and 17 who are looking at 10, 15, 25, 30 years to life. And so we do a basketball program with them and a mentoring program, and it's called the Brotherhood Foundation.
Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction. We're going to ask at this particular time our first female panelist. We're excited to have her this evening, Pastor Reva. I think you're on mute, Pastor Reva.
Well,
There you go.
There you go.
Here as well. Thank you so much for having me. And what an honor to be the first female. I was very excited about that. But my name, again, is Pastor Reva Watkins. I am a senior pastor of Majestic Life Church right here in Orlando, Florida. And some of the programs that we have at Majestic Life Church includes prison ministry. We have one of the largest prisons here called Coleman Prison here. We do work there as well. And we also do Angel Tree, where we care for children of incarcerated parents around Christmas time, and also providing mentorship for them as well. So this is a great conversation to have tonight.
Absolutely. We're going to have Mr. Brendan, if you would introduce yourself.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you. I'm in Philadelphia. I love how we're all over the place, really. I'm in Philadelphia, PA. I've been an educator in the region for about 15 years, 10 years of that in Philadelphia public schools, the past 5 years in independent schools around the region. I'm leaving a school called the Haverford School as their diversity, equity, inclusion lead to take on the role of upper school director at another independent school, Abington Friends School. And all of this time I spent in education, I've been, a student, but also a teacher of history. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation and to hear everybody's stories tonight. Thank you for inviting me. Excellent. Mr. Benny Roof.
Hey, how y'all doing today? This evening, should I say? I'm also in Philadelphia at this point. I am a workforce development manager for the city of Philadelphia. I focus on helping young men and women who are incarcerated when they get out, help them find jobs as well as folks with jobs all over the city. I'm also, one of the things that I'm most proud about is I've been a life coach as well as a mentor for a program called Voice Track for Department of Human Services in Philadelphia, and we really focus on young men. And sadly to say, we do have a lot of our young men whose father who are incarcerated and their families. So, we're going to bring that perspective, and I just appreciate you having me.
Excellent. And definitely no other than our Bishop Evans.
Hello, everyone. David Evans, pastor of Bethany Church, Lindenwold, New Jersey. Just thinking about the journey of prison ministry, having been one of the originators of prison ministry for this particular church over 25 years ago. When we're open, when there's no COVID, we service about 4 or 5 institutions a week, every week of our lives. I have the distinction of having a dad who was arrested for homicide, a nephew who was the head of the Malcolm X posse who spent about 35 years in jail from the time he was 17. Another nephew that was in jail who was his lieutenant, he just got out not too long ago. So I have a very intimate understanding of incarceration of young people, older people, and how hard it is for them to get re-engaged in society on every level. Started working with some returning citizens a few years ago and trying to get them locked into entrepreneurship, because that seems to be the only route that they have unless they run into or meet a friendly employer. So I think this conversation is really, really important, especially to our community. And I'm looking forward to what everyone has to say.
Absolutely. And we're going to jump right in. We're going to set the stage for the conversation because we know that people are tuned in. And so not to dig too deep, but I wanted to I think we have to start this conversation and put things in context around statistics. In 2020, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which gives an annual report of people incarcerated within state and federal prisons, stated that Black males are 5 times more, making sure you can hear me. Okay, great. They are incarcerated at a higher level of 5 times more than white males. They also said 1 in 50 Black men are incarcerated, which includes 1 in 25 Black men from the ages of 25 to 44. And so when you think about that, there's a lot of fathers in those statistics. So as we set the stage for our audience this evening, I want to start off with this first question. What are some of the causes in our communities of mass incarceration of Black men? And we're just going to ask anybody to jump in there.
You're on mute, Damon.
One of the really big issues, as far as I'm concerned, is how we do policing. There's a major problem in most of our urban cities where our young people are, and the best word I can think of for this is targeted. I think our young men are targeted based on what they wear, based on who they are. And so sometimes there is a preconceived notion that if a young Black man is on the corner with friends and dressed a particular way, then he is also up to no good. And once that happens, it's on from there. So I think that's one of the big problems. And then that moves into the court system, where there is not great representation in terms of legal representation for these young men. The judges, the public defenders, all these folk almost seem like they're kind of in a conspiratorial kind of a partnership to make sure that our prisons stay full.
That answer right there, I think that's so important to say, Dr. Jones, because so many people believe that everyone that is in prison should be there or are guilty. And it's so important that you brought that out. Any other panelists want to dig into that?
I think what I've noticed in that, and going along with Pastor Damon said, is that they may be appropriately imprisoned, but the sentences are radically different from one person to another. I saw my nephew get sentenced to like life when he was 18, 17 years old. They tried him as an adult. And I'm clear today, he did some adult things that should have gotten him locked up. At the same time, I saw people that don't look quite like him do some of the same things, and they got 20 years instead of life. So there is a disparity in the sentencing, which means there's a disparity in the way the justice system processes us through it.
Exactly.
The other thing that I think is, you know, when I went to get my nephew out of jail, if I had not had a relationship with the judge, we were watching the judge give out time like he was passing out lifesavers.
Mm.
And the judge recognized the church and then myself. And because of that relationship and the relationship he had with the lawyer, my nephew was let out on bail when he was giving everybody time. So there's a disparity.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When you said that, David, my stomach like kind of dropped when you were talking about kind of giving out time like candy, like lifesavers. For me, I think I just add to what everybody said so far in terms of, I guess, thinking about the origination of the police force as slave patrol. So I think that over policing pattern is historical. So I think that over policing is definitely a part of it, but that is something that is historically rooted. Being an educator, I think immediately about the defunding of especially public education systems. I went to public school, and I remember when I graduated from college and entered college, I was really grateful and excited to be in college, but I remember being told the statistic that 1 in 3 Black men at that age were, in prison. I just, it wasn't real to me when I was 18, 19 years old, although I know that statistic was real. But even from the time I graduated high school in 2001, schools have seen, especially urban schools have seen subsidies cut so that there aren't, extracurriculars in ways that really do engage young people, all the creativeness that young people have. So where does that energy go? Where is that? How is it developed? How is it cultivated? I think also low wage work, so a lot of the work that folks have access to, don't pay enough to create any real wealth for a family. My grandmother came to this country from Trinidad and Tobago in 1969, 1970. And when she emigrated and I think she was 21 years old. She worked in a factory for her entire life in South Jersey. We're from Vineland, New Jersey, a rural area. And I just remember her working 18-hour days, swing shifts, all types of shifts. And I think that a lot of people look at that work and say, well, not me. They look for alternatives to make money quickly, to build wealth where there is none. So I think those are a couple of things that came to mind with what's been said.
I told you tonight was going to be an awesome, awesome panel. Any other panelists want to dig in a little bit to that first question, setting the stage?
Well, I got a question. Pastor Reva, Florida seems to be at the center of a lot of news today, especially policing and inequities. In your experience, what do you sense is the reason that so many of us are ending up in jail in Florida?
In Florida, especially, I really believe that we should have some type of national policy for police. Because here in Florida, where we have the stand your ground laws, where we have police having the ability to basically murder and no repercussions, if there was a policy that was in place where police were held accountable, and not just necessarily to pay off the families, but then they get right back in to the police department. If there was a policy that was set in place that Okay, you've been found guilty, you've been convicted, and now you do go to jail.
Mhm.
This is the policy that's set nationally, and also how you are to handle criminals that are actively in crime. But how are you handling them? What is the force? What are you doing that is causing over murder, basically, where you're being too forceful? And so I think that what I'm seeing here is in Florida is that's what we need. We need to have some policy written. Talking about it is okay, but until it's written, it doesn't mean anything. And so we have a lot of people here that are discouraged. We have a lot of people that are disappointed to the point where they're just thinking nothing will ever change. After the George Floyd incident, a lot of us thought, hey, we're going to see some real change here. But it seemed like things did regress a bit. I don't know if you all feel the same way there in New Jersey, but it just seemed like things regressed a bit. Now we saw more happening right after that. And so unless we get this in and policy and legislation, then we're not going to see the changes that we need to see.
Excellent.
Could I add one other thing?
Sure, absolutely.
I think there's, we had a case in Pennsylvania. This is going back a few years now, where there was literally a judge who was selling juveniles. They would come into his courtroom, and this particular judge was in cahoots with some of the facilities that kids would be sent to. So there are all these little backroom deals and all of these things that are happening outside of the purview of the public that contributes also to this. And, it took a while for them to catch up with him, but they did catch him and put him in jail. But I think that speaks to another aspect that Harley has ever mentioned, that there are some things going on the bench, in these back rooms and chambers, and our kids are suffering for it.
Absolutely.
I've been homeschooling my grandkids, and about a month or two ago, we were pulled over on the way to the church. And the policeman walked up to the car. He had his hand on his gun. And I never really realized the impact that this environment is having on young minds. My granddaughter screamed out, "Daddy, is he going to hurt you?" She's 7. My 6-year-old said, "Don't let him hurt you." And they were terrified. And the policeman heard me talking to them to calm them down, and kind of started to relax. And then I pulled out my badge and all that, and he said, "Sorry to have pulled you over." But the fact of the matter is that initially my 7 and my 6-year-old child thought that something bad was going to happen to me purely because we got pulled over. And that told me that day the consciousness of our young people is being shaped to believe that interchange will result in some kind of violence and most likely death.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important that we laid that backdrop to this conversation, because people need to hear that there is a conspiracy when it comes to Black males, that there is a reason why Black males are in more prisons than any other subgroup. It's a reason for that. And so that was a great segue, Bishop, into the child, the child that has that father that is incarcerated. And I want to start this next question off by leading into a very short story. When I was a principal of a school, there was a kindergarten student, and she would go off every now and then. They would bring her to my office, and my secretary and I would calm her down. She always did that. So this particular time, I heard some screaming. I knew it was her. So I went to get up, and when I went to get up, they were bringing her in my office, and she was throwing things and going, she just had that day was just different than any other day. And when I brought her in, I said, "Calm down." And she said, no, I want to call my dad. And I said, "Okay, what's your dad's number?" Because even in kindergarten, they can tell you those numbers. So I said, "Tell me the number." And I picked up the phone. I said, "Well, go ahead, you dial it." And I went to go dial 215. And she said, no. And she pushed 911 on my phone.
Huh?
And I said, no. And I put the phone down. And I said, no. I said, we're calling your father. She said, the police took him.
Oh.
And initially, as an administrator, I thought maybe she missed something or was confused about something. And so I called her mother immediately, and her mother said, no, she's telling the truth. My boyfriend, her father, was taken last night. The police raided our house. She witnessed it. She is traumatized from it. I'm sorry, I should have called this morning and told y'all what happened, but I'm still trying to get over it myself, trying to get my door fixed. And they took him last night. And so that story sticks with me, and it will for the rest of my life, because it is such, even we're talking about incarcerated fathers, there's a child on the other end in a lot of cases. So my next question is, how do we begin with this phenomenal panel right here with having so many experiences as counselors on boards for prison systems, fighting against mass incarceration, being activists? How do we begin to assist the children who have a parent that is incarcerated? Where do you start? If you are the other parent trying to raise a child and the father is in prison, where do you start with trying to make sense for that child and trying to support that child in that situation?
Can I add something to what you just said? I think
Absolutely.
before we even get to that particular question, the corrections practitioners, those that are supposed to be looking out for the mental health and also different things in the community, I think they need to get involved a little sooner, especially just what you said, the child's father was taken to prison the night before.
Absolutely.
There could have been a call to alert the school so that when a child is experiencing that type of trauma, they're able to get ahead of it before there is any type of aggression or any type of depression. They're able to see it before it happens. And oftentimes that is not the case.
Absolutely.
And so not only does a child see the father is going to jail, but like you said, they witness it. And then many times they have to go to the court cases, or many times they're knowing the parents dealing with attorneys. So there is a lot of trauma that takes place in a child just before, the spouse gets into jail permanently or for whatever time period that they're put into jail. And so I think that as a community, for children especially, we need to make sure, again, with the policy, with the police officers, there is no policy for children when a child is present. We saw before in the news where children were put on hot tar in the parking lot while waiting for hours and for the police to make a decision. And they were innocent. They were 5 and 6 years old. And so that, I believe, is something that we need to really look at, the policies that are in place now for children, and then also how the corrections practitioners are really dealing with children to get ahead of it before they experience those mental breakdowns or trauma.
Absolutely. Phenomenal point. And especially in urban communities where we know that's not taking place.
Right.
I think there's a mandate for the urban church, the African American church, to accept that statistic as a reality and build ministry that supports single mothers, single parents, or parents, homes without a father in the home, to provide those mentors, counselors, just examples, and assertive examples, not passive examples, but assertive examples for young men and women to emulate, to see, to feel comfort in. We've been advocating for kids as long as we've been doing ministry, and I think it's a mandate for those of us that are dealing with communities that have this consistent problem. We cannot afford not to do it.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I'm a doctoral student, and part of my dissertation has a lot to do with mentorship and putting that mentorship inside the schools, being able to talk to these young men and women about what's going on in their lives. And I mentor the Boys Track program, and we find out that probably about 40% of our young men in our program's father has been in jail or is currently in jail, in prison. And we we find out that it's funny. We took them to a retreat. We asked one question. We asked them, "What's got you so angry? What's upsetting you?" And every last one of them, whose father was in prison, they was talking about the disconnect with their father. And one of the big things to answer that question is really, having that conversation with them, being able to have them, allow them to talk to us and share their experiences of being disconnected with their fathers, sharing their experiences on how it's affecting them, and also trying to figure out exactly what can we do to bring them together. Taking the risk, meet your father. How can we connect them with their fathers? Can we set something up so that they can talk to them a little bit more, so that they could connect with them more? How can we continue to bring them closer to their fathers, as far as, otherwise they're consistently going to continually be disconnected from them. So we just have to bring mentorship into the schools more, because it's great that we're able to get a few of them, a good many of them, should I say, in the programs. But if we could bring it into the school system, it would help them a little bit more. We could have those conversations, even when we don't know what happened the night before. We could find out what's happening on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm. Benny, I'd like to add on that point about school systems. I think that it's pretty plain nowadays that many school systems are kind of understaffed in terms of counseling support and mental health support. So I think mentorship is a really good kind of stopgap measure. I think that's really important and critical. But I would love to see more licensed professionals as a part of school staff, not as a nice to have, but as an indelible part of how schools structure themselves. I don't know if you've seen this pattern before, but I think about it when I think about Black Wall Street, or about other like historical events of trauma that have happened. The survivors of these events typically don't talk about what's happened, right? There's some type of embarrassment, or some type of, if I don't talk about it, I won't hurt the next generation coming up. I think kids show up the same way or a similar way when trauma happens. They don't talk about it, right? So I'm saying that to say, I think in terms of like, and I think about this in my teaching practice as an educator, how do you make it so that reflection is a part of the practice in the classroom, so that kids become, I don't want to say comfortable, but just more used to sharing what's going on with themselves as a part of the process of becoming a scholar. I don't think that's a part of, a lot of classroom spaces. So I think those are the two things that come up for me. I think we need absolutely more trained mental health professionals as part of school communities. And I think that in classrooms, we can do more work to make reflective practice a part of just how students are raised in school.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dr. Jones?
I think for the children who are kind of left at home while there's an incarcerated parent, one of the things that I think is critical is making sure that the child has adequate opportunities to connect while the parent is incarcerated. That can be done. It's much simpler now than it was back in the day. Like before, it meant a whole trip to go visit. It meant getting on a bus that was going that way, and the cost and all that. Today, they do it by video. It's easy to do video in some of the facilities. There's so many apps out today. I have an app now. I'm in touch with about 10 to 12 young men that I've worked with over the last probably 10 years or so. And it's a texting situation. So they text me one day and I can text them back the following day. Now I have to pay for that myself, but it's a connection. And I think if children had a way to continue to stay connected to their parent, that might be helpful for them.
Absolutely. Don't forget, to our viewing audience, our virtual audience, please send us your questions, because we're going to spend 10 minutes at the end actually answering your questions live. So we're asking that you send that. Some awesome comments around how do you assist that child, talking about mentorship programs. We know, and several people have said it on the panel, but in Philadelphia, we have the Amachi program, which I'm definitely sure is still active, the Big Brothers, Big Sister programs. And I hear a lot around the schools. And one of the things that me and my wife always talk about is the great concern around our schools set up to support Black and brown children. And I will say, as a principal for 17 years, assistant superintendent for 3, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And sometimes you feel that you are part of a non-working or broken system, no matter how much you try to prevent that. And so when we think about that, and we think about that particular father, and I think Bishop said earlier his father was incarcerated for a short period of time. How do you, if you had to speak to a father this evening that is incarcerated or just was released, how do they begin to rebuild a relationship with their children, no matter how long the incarceration was? How do they, somebody else talked about disconnection. How do they begin to rebuild what was taken away? Whether it was their fault or not, or whatever the circumstances were, how do you begin to rebuild that? So if you had to speak to that father this evening, what would you say to them?
Well, my personal experience is this, and my reflections are along this line. I think the assumption is made, and I didn't have to meet my dad, but my dad was present and absent at the same time. We can't assume that every father bears the wisdom to mentor his son, even if he does live in the house. Now, I say that because my dad showed me the weapon he was going to kill the man with. Now, most people would protect their children from that knowledge. But he showed me what he was going to do. And while he was incarcerated, freed, and eventually he was acquitted, found not guilty, I carried around the fact that I knew he had intentionally killed the man. So the assumption that a man present has the wisdom to mentor his child may be incorrect. I'm sure there are other examples. At the same time, we have to offer men who are present, who have been incarcerated, who have recently come home, the tools to re-engage their sons, their children. I think one of the greatest mistakes that they make, I met a man doing prison ministry that had been in jail for 40 some years.
Wow.
Life sentence. He was fit, which meant to me he was going to live a long time in jail. And he had like 6 children. And he was having a difficult time connecting with them. And I suggested to him that he try to relate to them as adults and not try to relate to them in his mind at the point of their separation.
Right.
Because he was talking to them as though they were still 6, 7, 8, and 9. When in actuality, they were 30 and 40 and 50 by this time. You know, so it's important that a man understands if he's coming back to society and his children are grown, he has to shift the dynamic of parenting. And I think we've talked about this before. When the children are young, you parent them by command. When they become pubescent, you parent them by conversation. When they get older and have their responsibility, you parent them by concern. You wait for them to approach you, and then you talk to them about their problem. So when a grown individual, male or female, is coming out of prison and trying to re-engage, they have to start with concern, when the tendency is to start with commandments, as if they have been with the child since they were born. So that first thing is important. How do you approach a child who has not known you or seen you for a long time? You don't approach them commanding. You approach them trying to establish a relationship.
Well, I was asked to speak at a prison once, and it's a prison program about fathers who are about to be released. And when I sat down to write, to really think about what I wanted to speak to them about, I thought about their children and their families. And the topic the title was just hear me, see me, help me. And the goal was to let them know you've been saying a lot of things since you've been there. They hear you. Your young people hear you. Your spouse, your son, your daughter, they hear you. And when you come out, they're going to see you. They want to see what you said in action. They want to really see, hey, I'm going to come home. I'm going to be a better father. I'm going to spend that time with you. They want to see exactly what you said take place. And at the end of it, I said, help me. And it was more so for the child, the spouse, the family, to help them integrate back into society. Because if they hear what you said, they see you doing what you said, they're going to be more apt to help you. And I agree with you, Pastor, that it's more of a conversation, because you can't recreate what you missed. You can only develop what you have. So when they come out, we hear you, we see you. Now we definitely want to help you, and we want to develop you and keep you on track, because we want you here. So we definitely have to create those conversations, but we're going to create a lot of conversations based on how we develop that father in prison, and based on his words and when he's coming out.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I would like to, Dr. Jones, did you want to go first?
You go ahead.
So I would just like to add to what Benny and also what Brendan said. You know, with children, many times when their parent is in prison, their father, they develop an antisocial behavior.
Yeah.
And so they do shut down. They shut down because of the trauma. They shut down, and it's just innate in them to do that. It's a survival mechanism. And so they need to know how to talk about it. But then what Bishop said, that when a father is in prison, sometimes it's detrimental to the child to actually see the father for periods of time until there's healing that takes place. There's statistics have shown that sometimes when a father is either on alcohol or drugs and they're taken to prison, then the home is stabilized. And so while the father is getting healing, that's the time, as what Benny Ruth said, that's the time where the father has to begin to develop. And he can start connecting to that child through letters. He can start connecting to that child to consistent communication on his part, where he is pursuing the child, and the child feels that pursuit and feels that love and feels that without necessarily it being done in return. But as long as that child knows that, well, daddy's there, daddy's changing, daddy wants to be better, and hears that, and that is continually played. And then it gets to that point where he can come out and they can see, hey, he is changing. So I think that is very important.
Awesome. We hope you're writing this down. I mean, you're not going to get this anywhere else but this Taking the Risk Meet Your Father panel. Dr. Jones.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, we've talked about the importance and how critical it is for mentoring to take place in terms of the lives of the children. But a lot of the men who are coming home or men who are yet incarcerated need to be mentored as well. A lot of these men have not had fathers in their own lives, and so it becomes a challenge for them to mentor their own children now, given the fact that all of these other layers have been added to the situation based on their own incarceration. I call it refathering. I mean, a lot of these guys just need to be refathered. And Bishop said something a little earlier in the conversation about, you know, the obligations of our churches and ministries. We have to develop strong enough men's ministries to where we are able to refather some of these men so that they can in turn, you know, go back and reconnect with their children.
Brenda, did you have something else?
Well, all of this just reminded me of a question, or kind of brought a question to front of mind for me that I didn't have coming into this panel. And I guess the question is, you know, how do folks navigate the feelings about what's been missed? You know, if there is this bucket of just experience and love and life that's been missed, how do, you know, fathers and children navigate all of the emotionality around that? I think, you know, the panelists have spoken so much to like ways, places where, you know, that navigation can happen, but that's still an open question for me. What does that navigation look like? And then what happens if, you know, you offer the spaces, but people don't want to face the emotionality that's connected to navigating what's been missed.
Anybody want to tackle that?
Yeah,
Multi-layered question.
I think that, from our point of view, we can't make the mistake of merely addressing the spiritual. We have to address the psychological and the emotional, and understand in most of these situations, the emotional is what drove them to the problem. And the emotional is what erects a lot of the barriers to the reconnection. So what we attempt to do when our system works, before the shutdown, we have a few cases where when it works, we start to mentor the father in the prison to prepare him to meet the child, and then mentor the child to prepare the child to meet the father. And we have to get the father to apologize for the lack of proximity, the lack of relationship, and try to get the child to, from a child's point of view, depending on how old the child is, to get an understanding of the failure in that relationship. We didn't find, I don't find that there's much, you get much traction by everyone being in denial. Let's just put it behind us and move forward. I think that what causes the angst to perpetuate is the lack of an explanation. One of the things that I talk about with kids is this is not going to make emotional sense initially. It's going to make intellectual sense to you, because some things that happen just should not happen. You happen, and I always use myself, you happen to have had a trifling father like I did, but you have a bonus. He's attempting to heal and fix the situation. So I that tends to work. But if you don't work on both sides at the same time, and don't deal directly with the emotional trauma of the situation, you'll have one person trying and another person in denial or lost in anger, or another person lost in denial and the other person lost in anger. Accountability and responsibility of the parent, and cultivating understanding of the child emotionally, I think is key to that connection, Brandon.
Absolutely.
One thing I really want to make sure that we understand is we teach these. A term that's been used a lot with our young people is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
We driving that term to them and making sure they understand emotional intelligence. One thing I really want to make sure we know is there's a father in prison, and if he's coming home, there's a child, but there's one more person that has to be on board, and that's that mother. That mother has to be on board in order to try to piece that together. She's one important part, and it's all about that father reconnecting with his child. But if that mother is pushing that child away and not allowing certain things to happen, and not allowing that child to have that emotional intelligence and feeding that, it's going to continue to have a disconnect. And even if those two connect, it's not going to be as smooth as it possibly could. So I want to make sure that we mentor fathers, we mentor the children, but we also mentor that mother to say, you know what, stuff happened, situations happen, but let your child connect with his father. That might be the missing piece for him to consistently, to develop the way that he or she should. So that is one piece I want to make sure we don't forget. There's a mother there in most cases that has to be part of that glue and part of that emotional intelligence development for that child.
I agree with you 100%, Benny.
Absolutely.
I think with me, I tend to meet with the mother and the child in counseling sessions, successive sessions, while the father is incarcerated. And I do that for two reasons. One, to support the mother if she's been producing the right message, but secondarily, to correct the message that she's been giving the child.
Yes, sir.
Because some of our mothers just don't know, and they're so hurt themselves, they don't know they're sowing these seeds of discord that may last the child the rest of his or her life. So we have a real strong counseling ministry here. And when I have a situation like a single mother raising a child, especially a boy, I have them come in together and talk to them in successive months, especially if they anticipate him coming home.
Yes.
And a lot
Dr.
of times,
Jones? Absolutely, Bishop.
I agree with what both of you just said. I was only going to say that it's so critical to tell the truth about all of this.
Mhm.
It's a teaching moment, and there are so many different things to be learned by a young person who's experiencing the incarceration of a parent. How did it happen? Why did it happen? Where was your head at when this went down? What was going on around you? What were some of the other precipitating factors? There's so much to learn. And I think the child is benefited if the truth is told. And I also agree that I'm glad you brought Benny that third person in, and that needs to happen long before there is any talk of somebody coming home. That should be happening from the moment incarceration happens, because a lot of kids get disconnected along that period. And if that connection is not established early on, it is much more difficult once there is the knowledge that the person is about to come home.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And as we get to our last question that will be moderated, before we look at the questions from our audience, I always like to leave the audience with something with our last generated question. And we know people say there are all these programs for, especially for Black men that come out of prison. And, their record would be expunged, and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, and nobody's going to ask them if they've been in prison before. And there's some truth to some of it. But in most cases, we know that they find themselves in the same hopeless situation that they did in many cases before they went in prison. And so with such an esteemed panel, as we close out the last moderated question, I'm going to ask you to share with some families some of the ways that they can prepare to help that person that is incarcerated, that is going to be released. What things can they be working on to support him as he's coming out of prison so that he does not find reentry? Because we know ultimately that is going to benefit the entire family and especially the child. Anybody want to give us any information on that?
I would like to say, when a person goes to jail, when a father goes to jail, the income usually goes down about 22%. Then when they come back into the household, it's still down about 15%. And so I think one of the things that could happen is that people could be working on employment for the incarcerated person. When he comes out, he has something to do where he can make money. Because oftentimes when a man is not able to provide, there he gets depressed, or there he gets into a place where he just feels lethargic, or he doesn't feel like he can do anything, but now he feels less than. And so then it attributes to him maybe falling back in substance abuse or doing some criminal activity and then re-entering into the prison system. But if there's a way that he can have a place where he can find his accomplishment and find himself doing and creating and also having the income to provide, I think that would assist him in not going back.
Absolutely.
The conversation, there's a conversation that has to be had between that family and that the father that's incarcerated prior to, he's on his way back home. Let's talk about what are your skills? What have you been doing? What skills have you developed? Also, the family should be looking at staffing agencies that focus on returning citizens. That's what we call it, returning citizens, because they are staffing agencies that have that total focus. You want to look at what based on whatever their charge was, what jobs are open and what agencies or what different organizations that were hired with a background. One thing about Philadelphia did to check the block. You can't ask certain questions, and you can't check that block. You don't even need to check that block until there's a certain point in the interview process or the hiring process. So one thing that we have to, like, for example, Parks and Recreation for the city of Philadelphia, they have 700 employees, full-time employees, and they have 1,500 seasonal positions. And those seasonal positions can be, young men and women coming out of prison can get those jobs. But you have to create a conversation like, hey, when you come out, you only have a certain amount of time. It's funny that we have, I remember in Georgia, I found out that they have about 15 to 30 days to find employment once they get out of prison.
Mm.
You have people who can't find employment who have degrees in 60 days.
Yeah.
So to make that a challenge, or you have to consistently see this parole officer and go through a battle about why you can't find a job, it's based on that conversation and really saying, hey, let's go find the programs and let's figure out, let's understand what you did and how that's going to affect you with certain jobs and certain organizations. So that's one way we can do it. Just making sure that conversation is had between that family or whomever who's going to help them, integrate back into society.
Absolutely. Great information.
I think there's a couple of things. One, there needs to be affirmation and encouragement for the person who's coming home. They've gone through a lot, as has the family has gone through a lot as well. But a person who's coming home is facing a tremendous uphill battle in terms of trying to reintegrate back into society. And so affirmation and encouragement from the family is critical. But I also think patience is very important because, as Benny just said, it's not as easy as, all right, you're home, now go get a job. When nobody really wants to hire you with a record, or if all of those 700 or those 1,500 positions are filled by the time you get there, you're still, a person out there who just can't find a job and those kind of things. And then, while you're being patient as the person reacclimates and tries to get used to being back home, I just met a gentleman who literally did 68 years in prison and just got locked up when he was 15 years old. And he just got out. It was in the news recently.
Oh, yes.
But he his name is Joe Ligon.
Yes.
He just recently got out. What is the world like now after you've been away for 68 years? I mean, cell phones, GPS, you name it. What is the world like now? So there has to be a level of patience with the family. But also, while they're exercising patience, there also has to be accountability. So you can't just let them just lay around and just not get up and do. So there has to be a balance between the affirmation, the encouragement, the patience, and the accountability.
Yes. Awesome. Anybody else want to add anything to that before we go into our audience questions?
Well, this kind of led to.
Go ahead, Brendan.
I'll be quick. This kind of where the conversation went kind of led me to think about mindfulness practice and just communities of mindfulness. There's a group in Philadelphia that's organized over the past year or two. I think it was over the pandemic. It's a group called Spirits Up. And the group brings together a lot of Black and brown yogis who do yoga in different spaces throughout the city, but also engage in mindfulness practices, which are, practices that are often done in white spaces and not done as much in Black and brown community. So I was thinking about, having patience with the self as an important part of, reintegration for a returning citizen. So I think, engaging in some type of mindful community might enable somebody to be able to, cultivate that practice of having patience with the self. And I think, some of the church communities that you're part of offer that too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think our fellowship with church, when we try to manage a person's reentry, we found it important that we remove some of the stumbling blocks that we take for granted, like Social Security cards, setting them up for driving tests or reestablishment of their license before they get out. Start talking to them about entrepreneurship, as well as have a job or two interview ready for them when they come out of prison. We've noticed that when that happens, it smooths the transition and takes the some of the anxiety out of what am I going to do once I get out. So we've had to be very, as a fellowship of churches, we've had to be very intentional about identifying employers who give viable jobs where there is no kickback from the boss and all that kind of nonsense. Get this minor stuff, Social Security, license, reinstated, all that stuff, start that process while they're preparing to come out of jail so that they don't have that initial anxiety and just think that everything is against them. And we found that tends to ease some of the transition Also for the family, knowing that, okay, he's got a job interview this week, he's got a job interview next week. He's, you know, he's looking into starting this landscaping business. I mean, you know, we've identified like 22 businesses they can start, because you can actually start a business without a background check. You know, and most of us don't know that. So we found that helps on both sides.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this panel tonight has been absolutely awesome. This almost feels like a two-part conversation. Boy, I'm telling you, it's been awesome. We have a disclaimer for you, to our audience out there, as you continue your questions that we can answer. We're going to take about 10 minutes to answer some questions. We want to thank Pastor Riva. Thank you so much, all the way from Florida. I want to thank Dr. Jones, to Mr. Benny Ruth, to Mr. Brendan. We want to thank, as always, Bishop Evans, just for taking this time out and giving this quintessential essential information that we need to talk about. And as a community, one thing that I think has done us some good when it comes to the pandemic is that we have put ourselves in these spaces to have more conversations about what's really affecting our communities, and how do we become problem solvers? How do we get away from just looking at the news each evening, but we become problem solvers in our own community? A disclaimer about Taking the Risk, Meet Your Father was supposed to come out on Father's Day, but because of these great panel discussions and some great movements, we will be releasing the book in September. We're going to go on a tour from September until we can stop. Hopefully, Pastor Riva will have us in Florida. Hopefully, Bishop Evans will have us in New Jersey, but we're going to travel all over. We're going to go all over, as many places as we can, to talk about these great stories and these great interactions, and Dr. Jones in Philadelphia. So we're just excited about these great conversations. And to our virtual audience, we want to thank you, because you continue to support us month after month with showing up and giving us some great insight on your own stories and how they have been impacted by the work that we're doing. And so at this time, we will take our first question. Let's see what we have. This is from Tammy Roberts. When will our communities begin to demand relationships with Black officers? White officers hate our men, young men. That's her question. Anybody want to take a dig at that? All of the panelists don't have to answer, but if you feel free to answer that question at this time.
I was on a recruiting assignment here in Philadelphia. One of the big things that they were looking for, they were trying to place officers. We wanted to hire officers, should I say, that were that looked like their neighborhoods. So, you know, we have Chinatown, we have all these different parts. So the goal was to try to find officers that look like everyone in their neighborhood. And it's been one of our biggest challenges, is to find Black officers, and to find them and keep them here. One of the big things is about Philly, they come and then they go elsewhere after a few years. So the demand of our Black officers and to step up is something I think that when we have those community meetings, each police precinct has community meetings. Those are the subjects that we need to talk about, relationships. And that's not always the topic of discussion at our police precincts. They're finding people to be there, but I think we need to integrate the white officers as well, because even though we want them, you know, our Black men, our Black officers to be involved, we have to demand our white officers to understand the neighborhood that you're serving. And that's the key. Let's have that discussion about relationships and the fact that you are serving us in these communities. You're not policing us, you're serving us. And I think that's we have to create conversation, communications. And if we're going to demand something, we also have to bring something, and we're going to have to discuss it.
Anybody else?
Yes, I would like to add to what Benny said. I think the question of Black officers, great, but we have to get the white officers to understand bias training, understand the different cultural differences. And so that way they can have a relationship in the Black community and not overreact, not overrespond, but understand who they are serving, as Benny said. I think that they have to be held accountable. And if we keep isolating that part of it, then I don't see how things will change.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering also,
we did do some work on that in Philadelphia, going back a couple of years. Some of you remember the old Adams Mark Hotel. So that'll tell you how long ago some of this started. But we had stakeholders from the Philadelphia police, the school police, the SEPTA police, the representatives from DHS, District Attorney's Office, and Public Defender all come together and try to work on what we started to call cop kid forums. And so we had a number of officers along with a lot of the kids that were deemed to be at risk. And we just had frank, open conversations. And in the beginning, we weren't sure we had done the right thing because they got really heated. And, the kids really, really put the cops on the hot seat. And the cops did the same. And then after we went through all of that difficult conversation, at lunchtime, we sat the kids with the cops, which the kids weren't trying to have that at all. But by the end of the day, relationships had started to build, and we demanded that the white officers be a part of that.
Yes.
And I specifically remember one kid putting a cop on the hot seat and asking the kid in front of everybody, do you white officers call black people the N-word? And the officer had to admit that, in fact, they do. And that started a whole nother conversation. So we've done it. It needs to happen on a much larger scale, and it needs to be a lot more consistent. And that program was even taken to the Philadelphia Police Department and integrated as a part of the training academy. It's a sensitivity for officers with cops and kids.
Absolutely. Great question. Great responses.
I wonder around this question, I don't know if it's realistic, but what about residential requirements that are supported with, subsidies for, officers to get homes in Philadelphia or in the neighborhoods that they're serving? I've heard a lot of folks talking over the years about community policing as a way to go because that's relationship based. What is the reality of there being some type of residential requirement for people who are, officers in Philadelphia or in communities around the country?
I believe
there's a 5-year residency policy here in Philadelphia, but after 5 years, they get to move out of Philadelphia.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they often do.
Yep. Are we going to take our next question? Let's see who's up now. This is Deborah Hassel. Terry, how do you help the children of incarcerated parents overcome the trauma of the loss of that relationship? Is there the ability for the child to be resilient and the relationship to be restored? Anybody want to tackle that on the panel?
I do. I think the resiliency of the children cannot become an excuse for inactivity. A lot of times we expect a child to work out something that an adult would have difficulty working out in their emotions and in their minds. So that resiliency is resiliency that has to be assisted. And that assistance is with the truth spoken to them on their level. If they're children in a faith household, then those faith principles have to be conversated on their level. But that resiliency is something that can be strengthened or weakened based upon the stewardship of the parent.
Yeah.
That ability they have to overcome is often disguised as their ability to bury a thing. And since they can't articulate, they act out instead of saying what they feel. So one of the primary things that must happen is to ask a child, how do you feel? Are you angry about this? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about your father not being here? How do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? To help them articulate something that's difficult for adults to articulate. That conversation has to be had. And unfortunately, a lot of our parents, I bring it up in counseling conversations, but a lot of our parents don't have that skill unless they're shown what to do and told what to do. And I go so far as to say, this is what you say, this is what you don't say. This is how you approach this. This is how you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that it starts to work because that is a strength that children have, but that strength must be cultivated.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're going to take our next question. We're going to get one more question in after this. Okay, this is from Robin Johnson. My question is, my son is 42. Dad left his life at a very young age, around 10. Now his dad's brothers stay in and out of prison. My son has never been in jail, but I feel his dad leaving him has him holding on to that now somehow. Can I help him as his mother to help him let that part go? Anybody want to speak to Robin?
She's my member, so I'll let you guys go ahead and talk to her.
Okay, thank you.
I'll jump in briefly. I think that one way to support him is to affirm, what he's feeling, but then to also support. I don't recommend him seeking mental health counseling. I think there's a lot of stigma around seeking therapy or engaging in therapy as a way of kind of excising what is gripping us, that which is holding us down. And in so many ways, what you're talking about is something that's lingering with him, that's holding him down. You as his mother can't as much as you want to, you can't take that from him. You can't help him excise that, but you can affirm what he's feeling and maybe even recommend repeatedly, as mothers do, as mine does, over and over again, that, he gets support in a way, because, and I forget who said this, but I loved the comment about, as kids grow, you parent them in different ways, from commanding to dialogue to concern. So show that concern repeatedly in this loving way to help him seek out the support that will really help him through this.
Thank you so much for that, Brendan. And we're going to patent, Bishop Evans always gives us those 3 ways to raise a child. But if we patent it beforehand, we might be able to take it. I don't know. But thank you very much. Anybody else want to speak to Robin on that?
I think Brendan said it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for that confirmation. All right. Our last question is from Vita Brooklyn. My name is Cheryl. Okay. Do you know of any volunteer community-based programs that provide a professional to be a mentor for a soon-to-be-released male? Most, as you have stated, need not only guidance, but encouragement that allows them to gain confidence in being a parent, in being a good worker. And they can learn by example. Anybody want to tackle that question?
Where's he from? Where's he going to come home to?
She doesn't necessarily put that in there. Cheryl, do you want to add a little bit? Tell us kind of where you're from.
Well, the reason I'm saying is because I have a few pastors that really do specialize in reentry. We've all gone through the same training, but they've been able to really engage in ways that I believe are very effective. And if she's in the Delaware County, Bethlehem, Norristown, Coatesville area, we might be able to attach him to someone who has been in the life, been incarcerated.
Okay, Cheryl says she's in North Carolina, Bishop.
Okay.
You know anybody out there in North Carolina?
Yes. Wait a minute. I'm 69, so it's got to come to me. I'll get Pastor Nick to remind me of that, and maybe her and Maya can help me, and I can connect her with someone.
Okay.
Which part of North Carolina is going to be important?
I would tell you that Philadelphia has programs. Their Department of Human Services have reentry programs, and that's when I went and spoke at that prison program. And it's basically volunteer fathers but they have a waiting list almost. Fathers want to get that counseling, want to understand how they can transition out. But they do have those programs here in Philadelphia through the Department of Human Services. I would probably tell Cheryl that's where she could start, finding out what programs in those Department of Human Services in North Carolina, in whichever city or area that she's in. Usually they have those.
Mecklenburg County.
Okay, usually they
Mecklenburg.
have
Okay.
those in the Department of Human Services because the focus is on the child, but they're really trying to connect that father-child. So there are certain programs. They're not large and they're not mandatory, but they are. They do have programs. And Philadelphia has it right here at State Road, in the prison on State Road. So start
Absolutely.
there. Start there at the Department of Human Services.
Yeah, and I'll look into
Absolutely.
some people if she's looking for faith-based stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Cheryl. We're going to take our last question before we have to leave you this evening. Let's see who has our last question this evening. It should be popping up soon. Let's see. I can find it, but it doesn't pop up.
Maybe that's our sign.
Is that our sign? No, it's multiple questions. I don't know why it's not popping up. All right, I don't see it popping up, so I guess we're going to end on that particular note. We want to thank our panelists again, to Pastor Riva, to Brendan, to Dr. Jones, to Benny, to Bishop Evans.
Sister Rita, John Key. John P. Key. And
John P. Key.
Yes.
Okay. That's
right.
that's the preacher. Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. We want to thank you again for joining us this particular evening. I love when people come from all over the country. So again, Pastor Reva, thank you again for coming from Florida. We had people from North Carolina tonight. We had people from Texas tonight. So it was just absolutely awesome. We want to thank you again to our virtual audience out there for taking the risk. Meet your father. We're planning to have 2 more panel discussions that will lead us into the book tour. We want to thank Bishop Evans for all of his mentorship and his push with this particular journey. I am so indebted to all of you for joining us as we continue to talk about these important pieces that affect our communities. Our ancestors solved a lot of things working together, and we want to continue that model as we continue to help our communities with solutions, because we believe that we are the answer to all of our issues, all of our concern. We have the answers. Nobody should know more than us about what we need to solve these particular issues that tackle us as fathers struggle with their relationships with their sons and vice versa. So again, we want to say have a great evening, be safe out there, and thank you very much. And thank you for our panelists and their preparation and all that they bring to the table. We will see you next time as you take the risk. Meet your father.